Benz, what's going on, man?
How you doing, Jack?
Good first meeting, right? It's a good start. And people will say, we used to get this question at Gitmo all the time, and they would say, I was an analyst in the human cell down there, and they would say, well, okay, well, how do you know they're telling you the truth? And how do you know? I said, we don't just assume they're telling the truth. You conduct source validation, and source validation is a process that is constantly ongoing. And so you sit down, you ask your first set of questions, you say, oh, interesting. Then you go and check that out, and then you come back, and you do so over and over and over again. So want to get your assessment at least on what we've received thus far.
Yeah, I certainly hope what you said is how it plays out. I thought it was very interesting. DOJ did ask the questions for the most part that Twitter wanted DOJ to ask. I feel like, as with so many other things in the Trump administration, they're very responsive to the buzz of the base. And so it was sort of an around the world tour, which was the good part of it. And I'll get to what some of the key findings were from what Ghislaine Maxwell's responses were. But I have to caveat it by saying that I sort of wish that the interview itself was conducted by a random anonymous account on Twitter with a deeper knowledge of the Epstein case, because there are many of these questions that are asked and answers that are given by Ghislaine Maxwell, and there's no real follow-up or next deep dive into what the actual meaning of the thing is, or more details about it. And so it's
so funny you say that, because I had the exact same takeaway reading the transcript. That, I remember, this was even back when I was working the human cell. That's what it would be like. You have somebody on, someone's in the booth, and you're sitting there listening, even in real time, and you're like, what was nice back then is you could pause and say, oh, you have a phone call, and then that person could leave the booth, and you could say, hey, A, B, C, D, E, F, you need to follow up on this, follow up on this, follow up on this, and then you could go back in real time. Now, I'm guessing they probably had a little bit of that, because you can see a few breaks here in the transcript, but at the same time, yeah, it's exactly right. There's so much you need to follow up with on here. But at the same time, if this was just a first meeting, hopefully the first in a series of meetings, then it's actually not that bad.
Right, but I guess what you're saying is, so Todd Blanche, who did the interrogation here, should have had a lurker Twitter account open, and he should have had a live thread on the lurker.
I'm not saying that.
Twitter,
I didn't say that.
Okay, so what did the Clinton
I can't even imagine how the legality of such a thing, but yes, basically,
it's like phone a friend.
Or you just grab somebody. You just grab somebody. You pull them in.
Right. Yeah. No, it's just true. It's just there. I think part of the issue here is, and this is another reason why I think, for all the heat that Pam Bondi has taken, it's really not all that appropriate, in my view, for her to kind of be the face of it, because she's not the subject. This is not an ordinary crime or an ordinary criminal cinematic universe. The Epstein cinematic universe is something that you need. It's almost like Star Trek or something, or like Marvel. Like, everyone knows the common crimes, but there are people who are really, really deep autistic nerds about it, who like eat, sleep, and breathe the entire cinematic universe. They can recount every story and sub-story and branch of it. And I don't know who at DOJ is like the in-house Trekkie, so to speak, who just knows, who has all the Epstein action figures, so that when they have the real life character in the room, they can actually get to the bottom of what happened. And
and you could tell, by the way, just to piggyback on that, you could tell, by the way, that some of the questions that were asked were very detailed. So whoever came up with this question plan obviously knew exactly chapter and verse, right, in terms of the Epstein lore, and just knew every little nook and cranny of it. But at the same time, it was just sort of this rapid fire, okay, we're going to go down the list of each question, almost like yes or no questions. Did you ever do this? Did you ever do that? Did you ever do this? Did you ever see that? And it's just boom, 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 without this broader discussion or an example of, basic. You don't really see any basic elicitation approaches here or different angles being run. It's just this direct questioning over and over and over.
Right. Well, I'll read off some of the transcripts, parts of it that I thought were very interesting. So Todd Blanche from DOJ asked, did you or did Mr. Epstein ever do any business transactions with the Clintons? And Ghislaine Maxwell says, I was part of the beginning process of the Clinton Global Initiative. And that was something I helped with, and that was me, and Jeffrey may have helped me and helped them. Todd Blanche then said, did you give money, or did Jeffrey give money to the Clinton Global Initiative? And Ghislaine says, well, so there's that. I think he did do that. And I believe that money may have also been independent of me. And she goes on to basically describe how they came up with the idea on a trip at Davos with Clinton. And this is also around the same time that Epstein was flying Bill Clinton around Africa while they were setting up the Clinton Foundation. So that's now a direct confession from Ghislaine Maxwell, which adds to the Epstein lawyers who claimed in court that Epstein co-founded the Clinton Foundation. This was actually while negotiating a plea deal with federal prosecutors. Epstein's lawyers wrote, Mr. Epstein was part of the original group that conceived the Clinton Global Initiative. And this is also an interesting bit of confirmation, given that the Clinton Foundation is back in the crosshairs this week, as there's been reporting from John Solomon and Just the News that 3 different FBI investigations into the Clinton Foundation were shut down by Loretta Lynch during the Obama DOJ, during the 2016 campaign, and that the IRS also had a sprawling investigation into the Clinton Foundation, but that too was shut down because the IRS claimed that they did not have enough resources to investigate the Clinton Foundation fraud. So, I mean, I can only imagine how massive the fraud must be that it's too big for even the IRS to investigate. Now, obviously, this is their get out of political cronyism free card. This is their way of saying, oh, no, we didn't do favors for them. It was just anybody who commits that much tax fraud, we wouldn't investigate because it would take too much IRS resources. Right, like we're led to believe that if we had kept the 80,000 IRS agents that the IRS asked for under the Biden admin, like they would go straight after the Clinton Foundation. Yeah, it beggars belief.
No, it's very simple, and we see things about how the Clinton Foundation, of course, was used to set up their own ability for pay for play schemes. By the way, it also goes back to Ukraine, Ukraine was, of course, the #1 source of funds for the Clinton Foundation. I love, by the way, every time I say that, they try to fact check me and say, no, it wasn't Ukraine. It was people in Ukraine who were well, thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate the clarity there, right? They make this weird semantic argument to say, no, it was just oligarchs from the country of Ukraine. You can't say that the money came from Ukraine. It's totally different. Totally different. Right. Because that's exactly how we talk about, I don't know, Russia, their country next door.
Right. No, it's just the former Ministry of Energy and the people who control all of Ukraine's media and natural gas and agricultural assets. Like, it's just ordinary civilians. These are the same kind of oligarchs that they love. I mean, the FBI took careful notes. Stephen Halper's notes, which came out, he was part of the original CIA crew during Iran-Contra and then was an FBI informant during Russiagate, kind of kicked off Russiagate in the summer of 2016. And, they were charting all of Trump and Mike Flynn's relationships with, quote, Russian oligarchs. And meanwhile, they're doing the same thing on the Ukraine oligarch side. But there were other exchanges that I felt were very frustrating, particularly around the intelligence.
We are coming up on a quick break here. So let's put a pause there. That was the first exchange, the Clinton Foundation, huge. We've outlined that. Coming up after the break, we're going to get into the other exchanges. We're going through the Ghislaine Maxwell transcripts and the audio that's been released. In the last segment here, we just talked about how Ghislaine Maxwell admits, and this has been something that's already come up in court, that it was her money and Epstein contacts that went into the very founding of the Clinton Foundation itself. Our guest is Mike Benz. He wanted to get to a couple other exchanges. Mike Benz, what were you looking at?
So there were several other, funny moments in it. One is when the DOJ asked Maxwell for examples of Epstein's kind of money laundering machine, his asset recovery business. This is something that I've covered very extensively. Epstein's start in the business in the 1980s. So after being hired by Bill Barr's dad at the Dalton School and then going on to Bear Stearns after a personal friendship with its CEO.
Which they ask about.
Yes. But then Epstein goes out on his own in 1981 to form International Assets Group, which was basically this one, as he built it, a one-man asset tracing and asset recovery business, but also an asset shielding business where he would shield assets for oligarchs and governments and hide them away in offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands or Swiss bank accounts. And then he would claim to help other groups he'd basically play both sides of the chessboard in the greasy business of tax evasion, effectively, which is when he was handling the family accounts of the Bronfman family at Bear Stearns. And he was still a client of Bear Stearns even after he left. So my presumption is that Epstein throughout the 1980s, because this is before he turned 30 years old, he went out on his own. So, you're not nearly an expert enough only 4 years into a subject matter to be able to handle billionaire clients. So what I assume happened is that he flew a little close to the sun at Bear Stearns, but they still found him useful. So he served as the front end and Bear Stearns still did the business on the back. But there's a great part where the DOJ asked Maxwell to give an example of what this kind of asset tracing, asset recovery business looked like in practice. And the first thing she starts out with is an example with like the Sinaloa cartel. So she says, so let's say you have El Chapo. Oh God, I don't know where that name comes from. But anyway, we've got El Chapo. And El Chapo's laundering money, or he's working with the Sinaloa cartel and he steals money from the Sinaloa cartel and he moves it to wherever. So he's got stolen money from the Sinaloas. And then she goes, this didn't happen. I'm just giving an example of something in my head. And the Sinaloa cartel says to Jeffrey Epstein, can you track down my $1 billion that the other cartel stole from me? And so Epstein would go and find the $1 billion and would take a portion of the money that was stolen at a fee and give back the remainder. And that would be on a percentage basis. So she's talking with the DOJ. And the first thing that comes to mind is doing business with the most CIA-linked Mexican drug cartel in Mexico and having them as a personal client and having them get money from track down money from other cartels and then taking a percentage of the cartel business. I mean, that's the first example you can think of, helping one drug cartel get money from another drug cartel. And especially with everything I talk about with the intelligence.
This really, I'll put it this way. It seems like, so, okay, what you're talking about here is when we would do a first source meeting, actually let's just say in the military context. And because I don't want to get into specifics, but what you would actually be doing is you'd be basically setting up a baseline assessment, so a knowledgeability brief or a knowledgeability base, a KB. So when you're looking at things like that, you ask these like really wide probing questions like that one. Did you ever know anything about any money laundering? And then she mentions, well, about this and that. It's like, oh, hold on. She just mentioned 5 different things that you could go off into in any one of those directions. So you want to build that in. And then off of any then further questioning plan, you would want to go and people can, look this up in the field manual. It's all out there on how interrogations work. That no, I'm not talking about the waterboarding, gosh, that's, or the CIA enhanced stuff. No, I mean the real stuff. that it's all based on, okay, we think that the subject might, or the source might know about these things, but oh my gosh, they're mentioning this, they're mentioning this, they're mentioning this, they're mentioning this. So then you build your plan off of that. And so you'd want to tailor. So what you want to try to do is you'd have your next session to say, okay, hey, tell me about those cartels again, right? And so maybe you have one session on cartels, then you have another session on accounts, you have another session maybe just, I don't know, planes or something like that. And so that's why I keep saying this needs to be a series, because there's just too much here.
Right, right. And especially when it comes to the intelligence links. And this is one of the most frustrating parts of the transcript for me. The first thing I did when I popped it open is I ran a Control F for intelligence and all the different.
The first thing I did was run a Control F for Mike Benz.
Yeah, does she have Twitter access there? Does she know? Did she get my love letters, Jack? No, there's
she did actually. So it was strange. Every third word was a code.
Well, so this is a very frustrating part of it for me, because it's one of those things where we still don't have any official word from either the DOJ or the CIA about the internal intelligence links that Epstein had or may have had. This is obviously a long-running saga, because the plea deal, the sweetheart plea deal that gave immunity to all co-conspirators, known or unknown, back in 2008 was cut by Alex Acosta, who then went on to be the Secretary of Labor for the Trump administration, after being the dean of Florida International University Law School, which is a very CIA-connected school, I should note. Florida International University is now where Juan Guaido is, and Maria Corina Machado. It's like a very big South America, Central America hub.
Mike,
in
apologies.
Miami.
Quick break. These tantalizing questions. A lot, it seems, left on the field with this Ghislaine Maxwell interview. But as someone who's done this kind of thing, I would just say this is a small aperitif to the main course, which would and potentially a banquet that is yet to come in terms of this. And so Mike Benz was telling us, though, about how these connections, these intel connections that they're talking about actually do come directly with military connections. And it's very interesting how, just looking at this, I keep saying, wait a minute, why are all these arrows pointing at Ukraine?
Right. And as you mentioned, the Clinton Global Initiative, I think the largest individual donor was Victor Pinchuk. And then obviously, as we covered, Epstein and Maxwell go on to help co-found the Clinton Global Initiative. And wrapping up the Epstein part of it, they did ask about the intelligence links. And while we don't have anything on the U.S. side, and again, the CIA and DOJ are still mum, even though Alex Acosta reportedly said that he cut the sweetheart deal because Epstein, quote, belongs to intelligence. And we still don't have the results of a CIA name trace. We still don't have any feedback. Pam Bondi said she'd get back to us about looking into Epstein's intelligence links. No word back yet from Pam Bondi on that, unfortunately. But they did ask about foreign intelligence. And, so they asked about British intelligence and Saudi, and then they asked about Israeli intelligence. They asked specifically about Mossad, though. And the real story here, Epstein got his start in this really during this highly militarized period in American history in the Middle East, around, even though his clients were Saudi Arabia, Adnan Khashoggi military contractors. That's who he claimed was his client in the 1980s, the most profitable, highest paid weapons dealer in the world, who was a Saudi guy. The whole Iran-Contra and Iran-Iraq war, U.S. involvement was through military sales involving Adnan Khashoggi, Jeffrey Epstein's client, and that was facilitated between the U.S. and Israel. But this was really a military intelligence story more than a kind of political maneuvering Mossad story. So Todd Blanche asks about Epstein's links with Mossad, and it's unfortunate that he singled out Mossad there rather than Israeli intelligence in general, because she said, not deliver. I'll read the transcript. He said, did you ever have contact with anyone from Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency? And she says, not deliberately. And then Todd Blanche says, did you ever think Epstein was getting money from Mossad? And Ghislaine said, I wouldn't know. But then in the very next question, he tries to move on and say, are there any other foreign nationals or high society folks or international businessmen or politicians that had a very close relationship with Mr. Epstein that we haven't already talked about? And Ghislaine Maxwell says, off the top of my head, I can think of Ehud Barak. And then Todd Blanche goes on. He doesn't follow that up with anything. He just then asks about Epstein's testosterone replacement therapy. Now, Ehud Barak was the head of Israeli military intelligence from 1983 to 1985, exactly when Jeffrey Epstein was starting off his entire career. Ehud Barak met with Jeffrey Epstein 45 times. They went into business together. They started Carbine, this big military surveillance company. They co-invested in it together. Ehud Barak is probably the most prolific Epstein figure in the story. Ehud Barak was also the prime minister of Israel while Bill Clinton was the president of the United States. We know that Jeffrey Epstein made 17 White House visits to Bill Clinton's White House and then helped Bill Clinton found the Clinton Global Initiative. At the same time, Ehud Barak was president, coming from running Amman, Israel's military intelligence. But it's almost like the DOJ didn't know who Ehud Barak was. And Ehud Barak, by the way, is very much an enemy of both the Trump and Netanyahu administrations. Ehud Barak was part of that West exec group, worked closely with Avril Haines and Tony Blinken and that whole crew. They've been trying to revive the Israeli Labor Party as a buffer against the Likud. So there's this kind of international alliance between the Democrats in the United States and Ehud Barak. And the fact that DOJ, she volunteered it. Maxwell volunteered it. And no questions about probably the single most prolific figure in the foreign intelligence side of this. And so I found that to be very frustrating. But obviously, this whole military intelligence side, it's always unclear whether the DOJ is avoiding those questions because they're simply not versed enough in the subject matter expert, or they don't want national security secrets, or they don't want necessarily things on the record that they don't want to get too close to. So that's also, I think, the kind of protective shield that has been over much of Russiagate and the Ukraine affair coming into these past couple months of disclosure out of ODNI and FBI.
Well, I think that's right. And President Trump clearly using this and Tulsi Gabbard with these disclosures on Russiagate to kind of reset the context of all of these conversations to say, look, there never was anything between us. That's all now been litigated. Let's sit down and have this conversation. Look, I was there in Anchorage. People can see with their own two eyes. I saw with my own two eyes that there was this direct relationship, certainly between the president and Putin when they came off the tarmac together, or they met at the tarmac, I should say. But at the same time, when it seemed as though, I'll put it this way, it seemed like the two of them could probably work out a deal together. The problem when it came to the deal of all the Europeans when they got back to Washington, D.C. on Monday for that multilateral meeting.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is one of the frustrations from my side of this here is I think Trump has a kind of Reaganite peace through strength philosophy, and I think that Trump's favors for the military-industrial complex by giving so much in Pentagon funding. It's not just the $1 trillion Pentagon budget this year, but remember, even during Trump 1, Trump gave the military its highest budget of all time, even in the first term. This is all while telling the military not to get involved in Syria, not to get involved in nation building. They accused him of being an isolationist while giving the most money to the military ever of any president twice now. And also, Hillary Clinton was on TV last week. She was on live broadcast TV news saying the first thing positive I think she's ever said about Donald Trump in the past 10 years, commending him for getting countries to fulfill their NATO commitments. But NATO is the big blocking point in the Ukraine negotiation. And not only that, NATO is doing a lot of the civilian censorship work that both President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance are campaigning against. And so I understand that the strategy that the admin is pursuing is keeping the coalition together. It keeps the Lindsey Grahams and it keeps the internationalist wing of the Republican Party somewhat loyal because they're getting their cut of the corpse, so to speak. They're getting their cut of the pie. But what you're running into here is that we're beefing up an organization that is on the other side of the negotiating table with us in terms of our own foreign policy. So the analogy I've been giving, it's like giving a dog steroids and then telling it to stay in the house, or like giving a dog amphetamines and telling it to sit still. It's giving
it
more money than ever.
Or when we give our kids cupcakes and we tell them they're not allowed to run around, or that they have to go straight to bed. No,
it's the marshmallow test. It's like
exactly. The marshmallow nose. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're not going to. Mike Benz, hey man, I got about a minute left. I know you got to run. Tell people what your coordinates are, because there's so much more to come of this. And look, if President Trump wants to drop the hammer, we all know he will.
Yes. Okay. Find me on X at Mike Benz Cyber. My foundation's work is at foundationforfreedomonline.com. You can also find my video archives on Rumble and YouTube.